beachy cars.
To stay. I know there's a way, 'cause if I'm being true.
Alright y'all, we're gonna check out and so I can show you why this thing does not want to start. And I'm gonna go through a systematic approach. We're gonna go through and check the fueling system and then the spark system, because an engine needs three things to start: fuel, air, and spark. And we're gonna isolate what's the problem with this engine very quickly. Never had a chance to put on video, but I will do it now. Alright, so stay tuned and we're gonna get this started. Another thing I want y'all to note is, take a look at this sparking. You see that? That's a lot of amperage. See it? That's a lot of amperage bleeding through the system. No doors are open, by the way. So that's another one of the problem with this car. Something is shorted electrically. So now I'm gonna start it, and I want to show you guys that this thing does not start, and we're gonna find out why, if it's air, fuel, or spark. Okay, we're in a car, and let me show you what this thing does. Okay, nothing. I'll get an engine view of this whole. First thing we'll need to do is take off the intake on this engine. There's two bolts holding it together. One on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. Just release the bolts on each side. They're all 10mm. And as soon as that's done, you're going to remove the intake hose, which is on the passenger side. The intake hose is put on with a small clamp, you know, the regular clamps that you see on the radiators of cars. Just use a regular flathead screwdriver to get that off, and then it should come right out. Before you start work under the engine bay, please don't forget to disconnect your positive or negative battery cable. That way you don't have a short circuit or some issue that you might not be able to get away from, like a fire. Okay? And then on this side, you're going to be able to get to your intake hose quite easily. So you want to take that off, and once you're done with that, you can proceed with starting this car and getting it started so you can understand and see what's going on with the engine, if it's taking in fuel or if it's not taking in fuel. Before we start this engine, just squirt a liberal amount of gasoline into the intake, or what you call here the throttle body. Not too much and not too little. Just squirt it in there, and then she should be ready to start. Well, looks like she didn't start, did she? So anyway, the problem here would not be the fuel, because the fuel is getting pressure. So now we're off to check the ignition. Now it's time to remove the coil and plug system. Remember, don't lose those 10mm bolts that are used to mount this thing together. Sometimes they are used to ground the coil and plug systems together on some engines. In this particular engine, it's not. And they're also hard to find if you lose them, so don't forget to keep those in a handy place before you put this back together again. Also, when you reassemble the coil and plug system, don't over tighten it, just a little bit, because if you over tighten it, you might crack the coil and then of course damage an expensive part, which is really hard to find anyway as it is. For this test, we're going to be using a spark tester. There's two kinds of spark testers. There's one that's designed for plugs that have the connector on top, and there's some that are designed for plugs that don't have the connectors on top. We happen to have the plug that has the connectors on top, so we're going to use this type of tester. What it does is, properly grounded, you can see a light flashing inside of the tester itself when you start the engine. So this will tell us if this thing is in fact getting spark energy enough to fire the coil and plug system, to fire the spark plug or not. On this test, we're going to be using a brand new spark plug, so there is no mistake made, or we can have assurance that the plug is going to be functional and it's not going to be one of those defective plugs or defective units. On this engine, like I said, has a coil and plug system, and we're going to test this coil and plug system to make sure the system is firing properly and is getting commands from the ECU to fire the spark properly. We're going to test it one of two ways. We're going to test it with the tester and without the tester. So on this test, we're going to test it with the tester in the beginning to see if it's got spark.
Hear that?
And again, there's no spark coming out of the spark plug with a coil and plug tester and the tester connected. Okay, test number 1 is complete. Now we're going to go to test number 2. Test number 1 was the spark tester and the coil and plug system connected to the spark plug. Now we're going to use directly connected to the coil and plug spark system. What you're going to do, you're going to have to find a good ground that will ground the electrode or the body of the spark plug to the chassis of the car or the frame of the engine. Once connected to this proper ground, then we're going to proceed to test it for spark again without the spark tester, so we can eliminate the tester.
So now you can see that there's no spark here at the plug. Even if I use my testing equipment, there's no spark. There's also no spark when I eliminated that and put it directly on the coil on plug. Okay, and there's no start when I put fuel in the throttle body. I'm going to do one more test. I'm going to test one more coil on plug, and if it doesn't spark, then we know it is an ignition issue, which requires me to take apart the ignition module or the entire system. We know it's not a fuel issue. We know it is ignition issue. It's not getting spark.
Okay, so we've determined that coil and plug number 2, or actually cylinder number 3, is also not sparking, which tells me that it's the entire system not working, not just the coil and plug. So this eliminates the coil and plug issue of all the coil and plugs that we tested. So it's got to be the system itself and not the coil and plug. So now I'm going to reassemble all these parts together again in the order it was disassembled. Okay, so first it's going to be the intake going to the throttle body. Then it's going to be your intake hose, then all associated bolts, and then after that everything is going to be connected again. And don't forget to disconnect your battery so you don't have a dead battery next time you do a testing or next time you start your car.
So folks, diagnosis was that simple. Okay, now as you can see, it is a spark problem, not a fuel problem. So the main source of that problem is this power module, I believe, is fault. Okay, not this area. Power module here, including this piece. I think this whole piece is defective because this is a switching power module that switches all of the high current in the engine, and including the CPU, which is over there, I believe. So anyway, that's how you diagnose a car with no start issue. Okay, there's an engine needs 3 things to start: fuel, air, and spark. We're getting air. We got fuel over here, but there's no spark coming out. So the source of the problem is here. We have a short circuit somewhere. So we are getting fuel because I squirted fuel, as you saw, in that fuel throttle. I'm sorry, I squirted fuel in that throttle body, and still it won't start. Okay.
Before you start work under an engine bay, you need to disconnect your positive. Before you start work under Before you start work under an engine bay, you need to remember that this is a tongue twister, damn it. Before you start work under an engine bay, and I screwed up again. Before you start work under the engine bay, you need to remember to disconnect the positive or battery. Damn it! Well, looks like she didn't start, did she? I think the problem is the fuel, or actually no. I think the problem is my voice. That's the problem. Damn it! Okay, test number 2. And I need a test on my mouth because it's broken. Well, that's not good. As you can see, coil and plug number 2 is not working as well. So what I've determined is that I need to get a better voice for this recording because it's terrible.